Picture this. You're standing outside Buckingham Palace on a crisp London morning, camera in hand, ready to capture that perfect vacation photo. The iconic red uniforms of the Queen's Guard stand motionless like living statues, their bearskin hats towering above curious tourists. For most visitors, this moment represents the pinnacle of their British experience, a chance to witness centuries of tradition up close. But what happens when a single moment of poor judgment transforms a dream vacation into an international nightmare? When a simple coffee cup becomes the weapon that destroys not just a life, but exposes the darker side of social media fame and the devastating consequences of treating real people like props in our personal entertainment shows. This isn't just another tourist mishap story. This is about how 20 seconds of footage can unravel decades of military tradition, destroy a family's reputation, spark diplomatic tensions, and reveal the terrifying power of viral shame in our hyper-connected world. What you're about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about harmless pranks, tourist behavior, and the invisible line between entertainment and cruelty. Because sometimes, the most ordinary moments can spiral into extraordinary chaos, and the person behind the camera isn't always the one who pays the ultimate price. Get ready for a story that starts with laughter and ends with tears, where a cup of coffee becomes the catalyst for one of the most shocking tourist incidents in Royal Guard history. Marcus Chun had always been the type of person who craved attention. At 28, he had built a modest following on social media by documenting his travels around the world, always searching for that one perfect moment that would catapult him to viral fame. His Instagram account featured the typical shots, exotic food, stunning landscapes, and increasingly daring stunts designed to grab views and followers. The London trip was supposed to be different. Marcus had saved for 2 years to afford this European vacation, planning every detail with military precision. His girlfriend Sarah had begged him to just enjoy the trip without constantly thinking about content creation. But Marcus couldn't help himself. Every monument, every street corner, every interaction was potential material for his growing online presence. They arrived at Buckingham Palace on a Tuesday morning in early September. The weather was perfect, crisp autumn air with golden sunlight streaming through the trees. Tourists clustered around the gates, phones and cameras raised, all hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty or at least snag a photo with the famous guards. Marcus studied the scene with the calculating eye of someone who understood the currency of social media. The guards stood perfectly still in their iconic red tunics and towering bearskin hats, their faces expressionless beneath the black fur. He had seen thousands of photos of these guards online, but being there in person was different. They seemed almost supernatural in their stillness, like living statues carved from stone. "They're incredible," Sarah whispered, genuinely impressed by the ceremony and tradition. "Can you imagine standing that still for hours?" But Marcus wasn't thinking about the discipline or dedication required to be a Queen's Guard. He was thinking about views, likes, and shares. Every other tourist was taking the same predictable photos, standing next to the guards, trying to make them smile, posing with peace signs. It was all so boring, so done before. Sarah noticed the familiar gleam in her boyfriend's eyes and felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. "Marcus, whatever you're thinking, don't. These are real people doing a real job. Show some respect." Marcus barely heard her. His mind was racing through possibilities, discarding typical tourist shots in favor of something more original, more shareable. He watched as other visitors attempted to get reactions from the guards, making funny faces, telling jokes, even dancing. The guards remained perfectly stoic, their training evident in every controlled breath. The couple had grabbed coffee from a nearby vendor, and Marcus absently sipped his large cappuccino while plotting his next move. The cup was still nearly full, the coffee hot enough to steam in the cool morning air. He had noticed how other tourists seemed frustrated by the guards' lack of reaction, and that frustration had given him an idea. What if someone actually got a reaction? He muttered to himself, not realizing he had spoken aloud. "What?" Sarah asked, but Marcus was already walking closer to the nearest guard. Lance Corporal James Morrison had been standing in position for just over an hour. At 25, he was a veteran of the Queen's Guard, having served multiple tours and earned the respect of his superiors through dedication and unwavering professionalism. This was his 3rd year in the ceremonial role, and he took immense pride in upholding centuries of tradition. Morrison had seen it all, tourists trying every conceivable method to break his concentration. He had learned to tune out the noise, the jokes, the provocative poses. His training had prepared him for anything short of actual physical assault. Standing motionless wasn't just a job requirement. It was a matter of personal honor and military discipline. The morning had been relatively quiet by tourist standards. A few school groups had passed through, some elderly couples taking photos, the usual mix of international visitors. Morrison's feet were starting to ache, and his bearskin hat felt heavier than usual, but these were minor discomforts he had long ago learned to ignore. He was aware of the young man approaching with the coffee cup, but visitors walked past his position hundreds of times each day. There was nothing particularly alarming about this tourist, just another person with a phone, probably planning another forgettable selfie. Morrison couldn't see Marcus's face clearly from his peripheral vision, but he could sense the tourist lingering longer than usual. There was something different about this one's energy, a kind of coiled tension that experienced guards learned to recognize. Still, he maintained his position, eyes fixed straight ahead, breathing steady and controlled. Marcus circled the guard slowly, his phone already recording. He had started a live stream, watching as viewer numbers began to climb. The chat was filling with comments, people wondering what he was planning, others warning him to be respectful. The attention was intoxicating. "What's up, everyone?" Marcus whispered into his phone, making sure to keep his voice low enough that nearby tourists couldn't hear. "We're here at Buckingham Palace, and I'm about to try something that's never been done before." This guard has been standing here like a statue, completely ignoring everyone. But what if we found a way to get a real reaction? The viewer count continued to climb. Marcus could see people sharing the stream, the chat becoming more active with each passing second. Some viewers were encouraging him, others expressing concern, but all were watching. That was what mattered. Sarah had been distracted by a group of mounted police officers and hadn't noticed Marcus starting his live stream. When she turned back to look for him, she saw him standing uncomfortably close to one of the guards, phone in one hand, coffee cup in the other. "Marcus, get away from there," she called, but her voice was lost in the general chatter of tourists. Morrison sensed the tourist's proximity and the unusual energy, but his training kept him focused. Whatever this person was planning, he would handle it with the same professionalism he brought to every aspect of his service. He had no way of knowing that his life was about to change forever. Marcus checked his phone one more time. The viewer count had hit several thousand, and the chat was exploding with anticipation. People were sharing the stream across multiple platforms, and he could see his follower count starting to spike. This was it, his moment. "Okay, everyone, here we go," he whispered to his audience. "Let's see if this gets a reaction." The September morning suddenly felt colder. Other tourists continued their conversations, parents called to children, cameras clicked steadily. Nobody could have predicted that the next few seconds would transform a routine morning at Buckingham Palace into an international incident. Marcus raised the coffee cup, his hand trembling slightly with adrenaline and anticipation. The hot liquid sloshed gently inside the cardboard container. On his phone screen, he could see thousands of viewers holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Morrison maintained his position, unaware that he was about to become the unwilling star of a viral video that would be viewed millions of times around the world. His commitment to duty, his years of training, his pride in service, none of it could prepare him for what was coming. The tourist chatter seemed to fade into background noise. The clicking of cameras became distant. Even the traffic from the nearby roads seemed to quiet. In that moment, the only sounds were Marcus's shallow breathing and the gentle rustle of autumn leaves in the palace grounds. Marcus looked one final time at his phone, seeing the chat filled with warnings, encouragement, and anticipation. He had spent years building toward this moment, the perfect viral video that would change everything. He just hadn't considered what it might change for everyone else involved. The coffee was still hot. The guard was still motionless. The camera was still recording. And Marcus Chun was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Marcus stepped closer to Morrison, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain the guard could hear it. The live stream chat was moving too fast to read individual comments, but he caught glimpses of emojis, warnings, and encouragement. His follower count was climbing faster than he had ever seen. "This is for the content," he whispered to himself, raising the coffee cup higher. What happened next lasted only seconds, but would replay in slow motion for months to come. Marcus tilted the large cappuccino and let the hot liquid splash across Morrison's red tunic, the coffee hitting his chest and splashing up toward his face. Morrison's reaction was immediate and involuntary. The hot coffee soaked through his ceremonial uniform and reached his skin, causing him to flinch and step backward. His eyes, which had been trained straight ahead for over an hour, snapped toward Marcus with a mixture of shock and anger. "What the hell?" Morrison shouted, his military composure cracking for the first time in his career as a Queen's Guard. The effect on the surrounding tourists was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Cameras that had been focused on other areas swung toward the commotion. Parents pulled their children closer. The morning's peaceful atmosphere shattered like glass. Marcus kept his phone recording, capturing Morrison's shocked expression and the dark stain spreading across the pristine red uniform. In his excitement, he was grinning broadly, apparently delighted by the reaction he had finally provoked. "Got you," Marcus laughed, speaking directly to his phone camera. "Did you see that? First time anyone's gotten a real reaction from these guards." But the situation was already spiraling beyond Marcus's control. Morrison, despite being trained to maintain composure under almost any circumstance, was human. The hot coffee had surprised and embarrassed him in front of hundreds of tourists. The violation of his space and dignity in such a public way triggered every instinct he had learned to suppress. "You absolute moron," Morrison continued, taking a step toward Marcus. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Other guards had noticed the disturbance and were moving toward the scene. Tourists who had initially been confused were now pointing and recording with their own phones. Within seconds, dozens of cameras were capturing the aftermath of Marcus's stunt. Sarah finally realized what had happened and pushed through the crowd toward her boyfriend. "Marcus, what did you do?" she screamed, her voice carrying across the palace grounds. Marcus was still focused on his phone, watching the viewer count explode into the tens of thousands. The chat was moving so fast it was just a blur of text and emojis. He could see the video being shared across platforms in real time. This was exactly what he had dreamed of: viral fame, instant recognition, thousands of new followers. "This is incredible, guys," he said to his audience, apparently oblivious to the chaos erupting around him. "We just made history." But Morrison wasn't finished. The young soldier had dedicated years of his life to serving with honor and dignity. The Queen's Guard represented centuries of tradition and service, and Marcus had just turned him into a laughingstock in front of an international audience. "You think this is funny?" Morrison demanded, his voice carrying the authority of his military training. "You've just assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Guard. This is a serious crime." Security personnel were now rushing toward the scene. Palace police had been alerted by other guards, and the standard protocols for dealing with incidents involving the ceremonial guards were being activated. What Marcus didn't understand was that he hadn't just splashed coffee on a tourist attraction. He had committed assault against a member of the British military in one of the most secure locations in London. Marcus finally looked up from his phone, and, for the first time, he began to grasp the magnitude of what he had done. Morrison's face was red with anger and embarrassment. Coffee stains covered his uniform. Other guards were approaching with stern expressions. Tourists were backing away, creating a circle around the confrontation. "Wait, it was just a prank," Marcus said weakly, his earlier confidence evaporating. "I didn't mean anything by it." "A prank," Morrison repeated incredulously. "You assaulted me while I was performing my duties. You vandalized a military uniform. You've disrupted a ceremonial post. This isn't a prank, it's a criminal act." Sarah finally reached Marcus and grabbed his arm. "We need to leave right now," she hissed, pulling him toward the crowd of tourists. But it was too late. Palace security had formed a perimeter around them, and Marcus found himself surrounded by officials who were definitely not treating this as a harmless prank. The lead security officer, a stern-faced man in his 50s, approached with the kind of authority that suggested this was far from his first serious incident. "Sir, I need you to stop recording and put your phone away immediately," the officer commanded. Marcus looked around desperately, suddenly, realizing that his viral moment had become a nightmare. "Look, I can explain. It was just for social media." "I didn't think dash, you didn't think," Morrison interrupted, his anger still evident. "That's exactly right. You didn't think about what this uniform represents. You didn't think about the tradition you just desecrated. You didn't think about treating another human being with basic respect." The crowd of tourists had grown larger, with people pressing closer to get better video angles. Marcus could see dozens of phones pointed in his direction, recording every moment of his humiliation. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had sought viral fame and was certainly achieving it, just not in the way he had imagined. "We're going to need to see some identification," the security officer continued. "And I'm afraid you'll need to come with us for questioning." Marcus's live stream was still running, broadcasting his arrest to thousands of viewers around the world. The chat had devolved into chaos, with some viewers expressing shock at how far the prank had gone, and others condemning Marcus for his disrespect. "Turn off the camera," Sarah pleaded, but Marcus seemed paralyzed by the situation. Morrison used the opportunity to address Marcus's audience directly. "To everyone watching this stream," he said, looking directly into the camera, "what you've just witnessed is assault. This person thought it would be entertaining to humiliate someone who was simply doing their job. The Queen's Guard represents centuries of British military tradition, and we deserve the same basic respect you would show any other person." The power of Morrison's words, delivered with military precision and obvious emotion, created a moment of silence even among the chattering tourists. Here was the human being behind the ceremonial uniform, articulating exactly why Marcus's actions were so offensive. Marcus finally ended his live stream, but the damage was done. Multiple other tourists had recorded the entire incident from different angles. Within minutes, videos of the coffee throwing and its aftermath were being uploaded to every major social media platform. As palace security escorted Marcus away for questioning, he caught one last glimpse of Morrison. The guard was standing straighter now, his military bearing restored despite the coffee stains on his uniform. Other guards had formed a protective formation around him, while maintenance staff prepared to help him change into a clean uniform. The contrast was stark. Morrison, despite being the victim of the assault, maintained his dignity and professionalism. Marcus, who had thought he was creating entertaining content, was being led away in handcuffs while tourists captured his humiliation for posterity. Sarah followed at a distance, too shocked and embarrassed to speak. The dream vacation had become a nightmare, and she was beginning to understand that this incident would have consequences far beyond anything they had anticipated. As they disappeared into the palace security offices, the tourists began to disperse, but the conversations continued. Many were already uploading their own footage of the incident, adding their commentary and opinions. The story was spreading faster than wildfire, jumping from platform to platform, country to country. Morrison was helped to a changing area where he could clean up and put on a fresh uniform. But as he looked at himself in the mirror, he knew that no amount of cleaning would wash away what had just happened. The incident would follow him for the rest of his career, possibly his entire life. The viral video Marcus had created would indeed change everything, just not in the way anyone had expected. Within 3 hours of Marcus's arrest, the incident had exploded across every major social media platform. The original live stream had been saved and reposted hundreds of times before Marcus could delete it. Tourist videos from multiple angles provided a complete picture of the confrontation, and news outlets around the world were picking up the story. The hashtag #CoffeeGate began trending on Twitter, accumulating over 50,000 posts in the first day. The videos showed everything: Marcus's grinning face as he threw the coffee, Morrison's shocked reaction, the subsequent argument, and the arrest. But, social media being what it is, the narrative began to split in unexpected directions. Marcus's original intention had been to create viral entertainment, but the public response was far more complex than he had anticipated. Many viewers condemned his actions as disrespectful and cruel. Comments poured in from military veterans, British citizens, and tourists who had visited Buckingham Palace themselves. "This is exactly what's wrong with social media culture," wrote one popular comment that received thousands of likes. "Everything has to be content, even other people's dignity." But, surprisingly, Marcus also found defenders. Some argued that the guards were public figures who should expect this kind of interaction. Others claimed that Morrison's angry reaction proved he wasn't professional enough for the role. A subset of viewers even praised Marcus for, finally, getting a real reaction from the famously stoic guards. The division in public opinion created exactly the kind of controversy that feeds the social media algorithm. Videos of the incident were being recommended to millions of users, generating massive engagement across platforms. Marcus's follower count skyrocketed from a few thousand to over 200,000 in a matter of days. Meanwhile, Morrison was experiencing the darker side of viral fame. Someone had identified him online, and soon his full name, military background, and even personal details about his family were being shared across social media. Photos of him in civilian clothes appeared on various platforms, along with commentary about his reaction to the incident. "James Morrison overreacted" became another trending topic. Critics argued that a professional guard should have maintained composure regardless of the provocation. They pointed to his shouting and visible anger as evidence that he wasn't suited for such a prestigious position. Morrison's commanding officers were facing their own pressure. The incident had caught the attention of senior military leadership, government officials, and even members of the royal household. The Queen's Guard was supposed to represent the very best of British military tradition, and Morrison's emotional reaction was being seen by some as a failure of discipline. "The whole point of the ceremonial guard is that they don't react," explained one retired military officer in an interview that gained significant traction online. "If they can be provoked into breaking character by a tourist with a coffee cup, what does that say about their training?" Sarah had returned to their hotel room, where she watched in horror as the incident continued to spread across the internet. Marcus was still in custody, undergoing questioning by palace security and metropolitan police. She had tried calling him multiple times, but his phone had been confiscated as evidence. The hotel staff had already begun treating her differently. Word had spread quickly through the tourist district, and she could see other guests pointing and whispering when she walked through the lobby. Their dream vacation had become a nightmare, and she was beginning to understand that the consequences would extend far beyond their London trip. Marcus's parents in California began receiving messages from reporters asking for comments about their son's actions. His employer, a small marketing company, was fielding calls about whether they planned to take disciplinary action. The incident was affecting not just Marcus and Morrison, but expanding to touch everyone in their orbits. The media coverage intensified when British tabloids picked up the story. Headlines like "American Tourist's Disgraceful Attack on Queen's Guard" and "Viral Video Shows Shocking Disrespect at Palace" dominated the front pages. The story was perfect for the 24-hour news cycle, short, dramatic, and easily understood. Television news programs began featuring panel discussions about social media culture, tourist behavior, and respect for military traditions. Morrison became a symbol for some commentators, representing the dedication and service of military personnel who were being treated as entertainment by a generation obsessed with viral content. But the story took another turn when Marcus's detention was extended. What had initially seemed like a simple case of disorderly conduct was being treated more seriously by authorities. Assault charges were being considered, along with possible violations of laws protecting military personnel and government property. Marcus's lawyer, hastily retained by his panicked parents, began trying to minimize the incident in media interviews. "This was clearly a harmless prank that got out of hand," he argued. "My client never intended to harm anyone or show disrespect to British traditions." The lawyer's statements only fueled more debate online. Videos of other tourists attempting to get reactions from guards were circulated as evidence that this kind of behavior was common. But legal experts pointed out that Marcus's actions crossed a line from mere annoyance to actual assault. Morrison, meanwhile, was dealing with his own legal and professional challenges. Military investigators were reviewing his conduct during the incident, determining whether his reaction had been appropriate under the circumstances. While most of his superiors supported him privately, the public nature of the incident required a formal review. The psychological impact on Morrison was significant. He had spent years building a reputation as a disciplined and professional soldier. Now his angry reaction to being assaulted was being analyzed and criticized by millions of people who had never served in the military or faced similar provocations. His family was also suffering. Morrison's younger sister received harassment at her university, where classmates had seen the videos and recognized the family name. His mother was afraid to leave the house after neighbors began asking uncomfortable questions about the incident. The viral nature of the story meant that it reached audiences far beyond those interested in British military traditions or tourist behavior. People who had never heard of the Queen's Guard were sharing opinions about Morrison's reaction and Marcus's actions. The incident became a cultural touchstone, representing broader debates about respect, entertainment, and appropriate behavior in the digital age. International media coverage added another layer of complexity. The story was being reported differently in different countries, with some outlets focusing on Marcus's American nationality and others emphasizing the broader implications for tourist behavior at historic sites. Chinese social media platforms, where Marcus's live stream had also been shared, generated their own conversations about Western tourist behavior and respect for other cultures. European outlets used the incident to discuss problems with social media culture more broadly. Marcus's detention was creating diplomatic complications as well. The American embassy was monitoring the situation, ensuring that Marcus received appropriate legal representation and due process. But embassy officials were also making it clear that they did not support or condone his actions. The story continued to evolve as more details emerged. Security footage from multiple angles provided an even clearer picture of the incident. Audio recordings captured Marcus's words before and after throwing the coffee, including his apparent glee at provoking a reaction. Morrison's military records were leaked online, showing a previously exemplary service history. This information generated sympathy for him among some commentators, but others argued that his experience should have prepared him to handle the situation more professionally. The incident was also raising broader questions about security at royal locations. How had Marcus been able to get so close to a guard with a potential weapon? What if the cup had contained something more dangerous than coffee? Security experts began calling for reviews of procedures and protocols. As the story entered its fourth day of viral circulation, both Marcus and Morrison were discovering that internet fame was very different from what either had expected. Marcus had achieved his dream of viral recognition, but it was destroying his life. Morrison had become famous without seeking it, and the attention was equally devastating. The incident that had lasted less than a minute was generating consequences that would last for years. Social media had amplified a moment of poor judgment into an international incident, affecting not just the two main participants, but their families, careers, and communities. Neither Marcus nor Morrison had anticipated how quickly and completely their lives could be changed by a single recorded moment. The viral storm was far from over, and its ultimate impact was still unfolding. 1 week after the incident, Marcus was released from custody, but ordered to remain in London pending formal charges. The Crown Prosecution Service had decided to pursue assault charges, citing the need to protect military personnel from harassment and maintain the dignity of ceremonial duties. Marcus emerged from the police station to find a small crowd of reporters waiting for him. Sarah stood nearby, her face drawn from days of stress and sleepless nights. The couple had barely spoken since the incident, their relationship strained beyond recognition by the consequences of Marcus's actions. "Mr. Chun, do you regret your actions?" called out one reporter. Marcus looked directly into the cameras, and, for a moment, it seemed like he might offer a genuine apology. Instead, his response revealed how little he truly understood about what he had done. "Look, it was just supposed to be funny content," he said, his voice defensive. "I never meant for it to go this far. The guard totally overreacted, and now I'm being treated like some kind of criminal." The statement was immediately clipped and shared across social media, generating a fresh wave of outrage. Marcus's apparent lack of remorse and his continued criticism of Morrison's reaction struck many observers as tone-deaf and self-serving. Sarah pulled him away from the cameras, but the damage was done. That evening, Marcus's statement dominated news cycles, with commentators expressing disbelief at his continued failure to take responsibility for his actions. Morrison watched the news coverage from his temporary quarters on base. The formal military investigation into his conduct was ongoing, but initial findings suggested that his reaction, while emotional, had been within acceptable bounds given the circumstances. Still, the public scrutiny was taking its toll. The Guard's commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Hartwell, had been dealing with the fallout from the incident all week. Media requests, government inquiries, and pressure from various advocacy groups had made it one of the most challenging weeks of her career. "This incident has exposed some fundamental issues about how we prepare our ceremonial guards for the modern world," she explained in a closed meeting with senior officials. Lance Corporal Morrison performed his duties admirably under extremely difficult circumstances, but we need to consider how social media has changed the nature of these assignments. The meeting was part of a broader review that the incident had triggered. Government officials were examining security protocols, media policies, and guidelines for handling disruptive tourists. The Ministry of Defense was considering new regulations specifically addressing social media harassment of military personnel. Meanwhile, Marcus's legal troubles were mounting. The assault charges carried potential jail time and a permanent criminal record. His lawyer was pushing for a plea agreement, but prosecutors seemed determined to make an example of the case. "The Crown takes seriously any assault against military personnel," explained the lead prosecutor in a statement to the media. Mr. Chin's actions were not a harmless prank, but a deliberate attack on someone performing their duties in service of the Crown. Marcus's employer in California had already terminated his employment, citing the negative publicity and violation of company values. The marketing firm released a statement distancing itself from Marcus's actions and emphasizing its respect for military service members. The financial implications were becoming clear as well. Legal fees for defending against the criminal charges were mounting quickly. Marcus's parents had depleted their savings to hire competent representation, and the couple's London hotel bills continued to accumulate as they were required to remain in the country. Sarah had contacted her own lawyer about the possibility of civil liability. If Morrison decided to sue for damages related to emotional distress, lost career opportunities, or other consequences of the viral incident, she could potentially be held responsible as well. The relationship between Marcus and Sarah was deteriorating rapidly. She had supported him through various social media controversies in the past, but this incident had crossed a line she couldn't forgive. "You humiliated another human being for views," she told him during one of their increasingly frequent arguments. "And you still don't seem to understand why that's wrong." Marcus's response revealed how deeply the social media mindset had affected his thinking. "Everyone's acting like I committed some terrible crime, but it was just content. People do this stuff all the time online." Their fundamental disagreement about the nature of Marcus's actions was irreconcilable. Sarah began making arrangements to return to California alone, leaving Marcus to face the legal consequences of his actions without her support. Morrison was dealing with his own relationship challenges. The constant media attention and online harassment had put enormous strain on his engagement to his longtime girlfriend, Emma. She had received threatening messages from Marcus's supporters and unwanted attention from reporters seeking additional details about Morrison's personal life. "I signed up to be with a soldier, not a viral internet celebrity," Emma confided to Morrison's sister during one particularly difficult conversation. "This whole situation has changed everything about our lives." The psychological evaluation that was part of Morrison's military review revealed the extent of the emotional damage the incident had caused. Despite his outward stoicism, Morrison was struggling with anxiety, sleep disturbances, and intrusive thoughts about the confrontation. Dr. Margaret Thornton, the military psychologist conducting the evaluation, noted in her report that Morrison was experiencing symptoms consistent with a stress reaction to public humiliation and harassment. Lance Corporal Morrison has endured sustained public scrutiny and criticism for his reaction to an unprovoked assault, she wrote. While his military training provided him with coping mechanisms, the viral nature of this incident has created stressors beyond what we typically prepare personnel to handle. The psychological impact extended to Morrison's unit as well. Other guards reported feeling more anxious about their ceremonial duties, worried that they might become the next target of someone seeking viral fame. The incident had changed the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace, with guards now hyper-vigilant about tourists approaching with phones or potential props. Security protocols had been quietly enhanced in response to the incident. Plainclothes officers were now positioned to intervene more quickly if tourists appeared to be planning disruptive actions. The changes were subtle but represented a significant shift in how ceremonial duties were protected. Marcus's social media accounts, which had initially gained followers after the incident, were now experiencing a backlash. The combination of his defiant public statements and growing legal troubles had turned public opinion decisively against him. His follower count began dropping as sponsors and brand partners distanced themselves from the controversy. The financial consequences were becoming severe. Marcus had hoped to monetize his viral fame through sponsorship deals and appearances, but instead found himself unemployable and facing mounting legal bills. The dream of social media success had become a nightmare of debt and legal liability. Morrison's military review concluded with a formal reprimand for losing his composure, but also with a commendation for his overall service and handling of an extremely difficult situation. The mixed outcome reflected the complexity of judging military conduct in the age of viral media. Colonel Hartwell delivered the results personally. "Lance Corporal Morrison, your reaction was understandable and largely appropriate given the circumstances. However, we must maintain the highest standards of discipline, even under provocation. Consider this a learning experience about the challenges of serving in the modern media environment." Morrison accepted the reprimand without complaint, but privately wondered if his military career would ever recover from the incident. The viral videos would remain online forever, potentially affecting future promotions and assignments. The British public was beginning to rally around Morrison as more details emerged about the harassment he and his family had endured. A crowdfunding campaign to support him raised over £50,000 in just 3 days, demonstrating significant sympathy for his situation. Marcus watched the fundraising efforts with growing resentment. In his mind, he was being unfairly persecuted for what he still saw as harmless entertainment. The possibility that his actions had caused genuine harm to another person remained difficult for him to accept. The contrast between the two men's situations was stark. Morrison, despite being the victim of the assault, was facing professional consequences and personal trauma. Marcus, the perpetrator, was primarily concerned with the impact on his own reputation and financial situation. As the legal proceedings moved forward, both men were learning that the age of social media had created new forms of justice and consequence that operated independently of traditional legal systems. The court of public opinion was already in session, and its verdict was being delivered one comment, share, and reaction at a time. 3 months after the incident, Marcus stood in a London courtroom wearing an ill-fitting suit borrowed from his lawyer. The assault trial had attracted international media attention, with reporters from around the world covering what had become known as the coffee cup case. The prosecution had built a comprehensive case demonstrating not just the physical assault, but the psychological impact on Morrison and the broader implications for military personnel safety. Video evidence from multiple angles showed clearly that Marcus's actions were deliberate and unprovoked. Morrison testified with the same quiet dignity he had displayed throughout the ordeal. Dressed in civilian clothes, he appeared smaller and more vulnerable than he had in his ceremonial uniform, making his testimony all the more powerful. "The defendant treated me like a prop in his entertainment show," Morrison explained to the court. "He never saw me as a human being doing my job. The humiliation of being assaulted while representing my country, then having that humiliation broadcast to millions of people, has fundamentally changed how I view my service." The defense team tried to argue that Marcus's actions constituted a harmless prank that had been blown out of proportion by social media hysteria. They presented character witnesses and emphasized Marcus's lack of criminal history. But the prosecution's expert witness on social media behavior delivered devastating testimony about the calculated nature of Marcus's actions. Dr. Rachel Winters, a professor of digital media studies, explained how Marcus had deliberately planned and executed the assault for maximum viral impact. The defendant's behavior patterns on social media show a clear escalation toward increasingly provocative content, she testified. The attack on Lance Corporal Morrison was not spontaneous, but the logical conclusion of a strategy designed to generate views through shocking behavior. The trial became a broader examination of social media culture and its impact on human behavior. Expert witnesses discussed the psychology of viral content, the dehumanizing effect of treating people as entertainment, and the long-term consequences of online harassment. Marcus's own testimony did little to help his case. Under cross-examination, he continued to downplay the seriousness of his actions and express resentment about the consequences he was facing. "I never intended to hurt anyone," he insisted. "It was just supposed to be funny content for my followers. People are acting like I committed some terrible crime, but it was just a cup of coffee." The prosecutor's response was swift and pointed. "Mr. Chun, would you consider it just a cup of coffee if someone threw hot liquid at you while you were trying to do your job?" Marcus's answer revealed the depth of his disconnection from reality. "That's different. I'm not wearing a costume and standing around for tourists to look at." The judge's expression suggested that Marcus had just destroyed any remaining sympathy the court might have had for him. Morrison's victim impact statement provided the most emotional moment of the trial. Reading from prepared notes, he described how the incident had affected every aspect of his life. "I joined the Queen's Guard because I believed in service, tradition, and representing my country with honor," he said, his voice steady but filled with pain. "Mr. Chun turned me into a viral meme. He made my dedication to duty into entertainment for people who will never understand what service means." Morrison went on to describe the ongoing harassment from Marcus's supporters, the impact on his family, and his struggles with anxiety and depression following the incident. "The worst part isn't even what he did to me," Morrison continued. "It's what this incident represents about how our society treats other human beings. When someone in uniform becomes just content for social media, we've lost something essential about basic human decency." The courtroom was silent as Morrison finished his statement. Several jurors were visibly moved by his testimony. When the verdict came, it was swift and decisive. Marcus was found guilty of assault and sentenced to 6 months in prison, along with a substantial fine and community service requirements. The judge's comments during sentencing made clear that the court viewed this as more than just a simple assault case. "Mr. Chun, your actions represent a troubling trend in which individuals seek fame and attention without regard for the dignity and welfare of others," the judge stated. You treated Lance Corporal Morrison not as a fellow human being deserving of respect, but as a prop in your personal entertainment show. This court cannot and will not tolerate such behavior. The sentence sent shockwaves through social media communities. Many influencers and content creators began reassessing their own behavior, recognizing that the line between entertainment and harassment was clearer than they had realized. Marcus's appeals were unsuccessful. He served his full sentence in a London prison, where he had extensive time to reflect on the consequences of his actions. Fellow inmates, many of whom had military connections or family members in service, made his incarceration particularly difficult. Morrison used the trial's conclusion to announce his decision to leave the Queen's Guard. The constant attention and reminder of the incident made it impossible for him to continue in his ceremonial role with the peace of mind necessary for effective service. This decision isn't about letting the defendant win, Morrison explained in a carefully worded statement. It's about recognizing that the incident has fundamentally changed my relationship with public service. I'll continue serving my country, but in a different capacity. Morrison transferred to a special forces unit where his skills and dedication could be utilized away from public scrutiny. His commanding officers praised his professionalism throughout the ordeal and his decision to continue serving despite the difficulties he had faced. The long-term impact of the incident extended far beyond the two main participants. Sarah had indeed returned to California alone and filed for divorce while Marcus was in prison. She eventually changed her name and moved to a different city to escape the association with the incident. Living with someone who could treat another person that way, then refused to take responsibility for it, taught me something important about character, she explained in her only interview about the incident. Marcus never understood that what he did was wrong, even after seeing all the pain it caused. Marcus's family relationships were also permanently damaged. His parents, who had depleted their savings for his legal defense, struggled to understand how their son could have acted so callously. His younger brother reported being bullied at school because of the association with the viral incident. The incident led to significant policy changes as well. The Ministry of Defense implemented new guidelines for protecting ceremonial guards from harassment. Tourist behavior around military installations was more closely monitored, and penalties for interfering with military personnel were strengthened. Social media platforms also began taking the incident more seriously as an example of harmful content. Several companies updated their community guidelines to explicitly prohibit content that harassed or humiliated individuals in service roles. Educational institutions began using the incident as a case study in media ethics and digital citizenship. The story became required viewing in several university courses examining the intersection of social media and human dignity. Morrison eventually found peace through his work with veteran support organizations. He began speaking publicly about the psychological impact of viral harassment and advocating for better protections for service members in the digital age. The internet never forgets, he would tell audiences. That can be a terrible curse, but it can also be a powerful tool for education. If my experience helps other people understand the human cost of treating others as entertainment, then maybe some good can come from it. Marcus was released from prison after serving his full sentence, but found reintegration into society difficult. His criminal record made employment challenging, and the viral nature of his crime meant that potential employers could easily research his background. He eventually found work in manual labor, far removed from the marketing and social media world where he had once hoped to build his career. His social media accounts remained largely dormant, as any attempt to rebuild his online presence was immediately connected to the coffee incident. In rare interviews years later, Marcus showed signs of genuine remorse for his actions. Prison and the loss of his relationship, career, and family connections had finally forced him to confront the reality of what he had done. I destroyed someone else's life for a few minutes of viral fame, he admitted in one interview. I can't undo that, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person than I was that day. The viral videos of the incident remained online, serving as a permanent reminder of how quickly poor judgment can transform lives. The story became a cautionary tale about social media culture, the importance of treating others with dignity, and the lasting consequences of actions taken in pursuit of temporary fame. Morrison and Marcus never spoke again after the trial, but both men carried the incident with them for years. For Morrison, it became a source of strength and purpose, driving his advocacy work and commitment to service. For Marcus, it remained a source of shame and regret, a reminder of the person he had been and his determination never to be that person again. The coffee that Marcus threw lasted only seconds, but its impact echoed for years, touching countless lives and changing how society thought about viral content, human dignity, and the real cost of treating other people as entertainment. In the end, both men learned that in the age of social media, a single moment can define a lifetime. The question is whether that definition becomes a source of purpose or a burden of regret.